Good evening, everybody. I would like to thank you for coming in from Alpha Site Services here. So thank you for taking your time with us. So this session is going to be done by Mr. Siddharth Rastogi. So I would like to start with a brief introduction on Mr. Siddharth. So Mr. Siddharth Rastogi has been there in this industry for the last 2 decades in financial markets. And he's currently the principal officer and managing director. He's also COO and head sales with Ambit Asset Management. He's working for them as a in this capacity currently, and he specializes in majorly in economics, capital markets, fundraising, investment banking, and behavioral finance. Without much ado, I wanted to hand it over to Mr. Siddharth.
Thank you, Balaji. Thanks for the kind introduction. Namaste to all of you. Thank you for joining this session. Start with a little bit of journey. Today we are going to talk about the super cycle of Indian equities. So I hear the concerns which Balaji has raised, and rightfully so, about the QE, the quantitative easing being withdrawn, the interest rates perhaps moving northward, inflation in United States of America reaching a 4-decade high of 6.2%. In Germany, reaching a 13-year high of 4.2%. FIIs exiting India. What's the future like? But that's today and now, and we will cover all these 4 points. I have jotted them down. But let's figure out where are we standing and what is in front of us. Because one thing is for sure, when you are investing in equities, you are not investing in equities for a today and now. You are investing at least for 36 months, 48 months, maybe 72 months, maybe for 120 months. Because if you truly want to get the benefit of Indian equity markets, the India's growth story, then you have to remain invested for a longer period of time. And it's not by design, it's by default. All the cylinders of Indian equity are firing parallelly at the same time. Let me give you some very interesting data points. And how our mind is still stuck for today and now and cannot look beyond. A general disclaimer, we are not trying to solicit anything. Whatever this presentation contains, it is only for the informational purpose. You should not make an investment decision basis the commentary or basis the comments, basis the numbers, basis the data, what you're seeing here. You should always consult your financial advisor before you invest any single penny. You should always stick to your asset allocation, and you should always make sure that you invest only your surplus funds, which you can be away from for at least 3 to 6 years minimum. This presentation also will question your basic beliefs which you already had built over the years from childhood till now about investments, about markets, about Indian equities, or generally about life as well. So don't be perturbed if your basic beliefs may get changed, may get shattered because of this presentation. So there is a very interesting quote, and I just simply love this quote. This quote comes from one of the greatest human beings on this planet, the guy who actually avoided, who actually ensured that America becomes in real terms great. He kept the country unified. He ended the civil war, and he tried to change the apartheid. He wanted to bring equality. He removed the bonded labor. He created the slave trade in United States, Abraham Lincoln. And he said a very pertinent thing. This is not only applicable in investments, but it's also in life, it's also in living, it's also in relationships. That is, Be sure you put your feet in the right place and then stand firm. Then stand firm. That's true for relationships. That's true for investing. Before you invest, know where you are investing, know where you are heading towards. And once you have moved in that direction, stand firm. Don't keep changing your perspective. Don't keep changing. Don't keep moving from one place to another. Do your due diligence well before you get in. And once you have dug in, your feet stay put. This is a very interesting slide. It talks about the normalcy. People, so let me give you a perspective why I am showing this slide to you. So you guys remember that some of you who would have been in the market, I surely was, maybe some of my younger colleagues were not there in the market. We witnessed a similar kind of bull run previously in the Indian economy from 2003 till about 2007. And most people believe now that this bull run of 2021 or 2020-21 is coming to an end. Is it so? Are we at the base camp or are we at the summit? Are we doing the summit of Mount Everest? I surely think we are only at the base camp, because our mind believes that whatever is recent, whatever we have seen today is only the reality. But the challenge is the normal keeps changing. And that's the classic example which we can see of Afghanistan of 1975 and Afghanistan of 2021. In 75, the rights of women, the liberties of women, the freedom to women in the country of Afghanistan was way ahead as compared to its peers, and way ahead of some of its peers as of today as well. It has taken merely 4.5 decades to move backwards. And that's the new normalcy for Afghanistan for future finite period of time. So if someone believes that Afghanistan always has been like this, it's not the case. There's always an inflection point in every human's journey, in every country's journey, and in every community's journey, which changes the trajectory, that inflection point. And India is on that cusp of that inflection point. It's right at that inflection point. Another simple example, people who used to believe that calculators, which were luxury 1960s, the desktop computer, which was something which one will be proud of, which one will boast about in 80s, is today not even used anymore. And as the technology progresses, today neither the smartphones nor the artificial intelligence nor the cloud is something which is a luxury. All of them are basic necessities. This also proves the point. It also proves the point, something which was unusual in the past is a new usual. Another very simple example, we are living in today's world. If there is a bomb blast which happens in a country like Norway, it's unusual, it's unheard of. It will happen once in half a decade, once in a decade, where people will die, where people will have challenges. However, for a country like Pakistan, for a country like Afghanistan, these bomb blasts are rather normal. People dying, the value of life is rather normal. So two different countries living in the present era, having different belief system, perceive the world differently. And hence, equity markets are exactly the same way. People believe that there has been a significant bull run and then now there is going to be a crash. And every time people believe that there is a crash and then there was not a crash. We saw We saw that people were anticipating after 5th of November, after the US presidential elections, people believed that there will be a significant crash. Nothing happened. Second wave came. People believed that we are sitting at the fence. The crash will come. It never came. Even during COVID times, the crash came for merely 3 to 4 days. And in a matter of 3 to 4 months, the entire markets recovered totally. That's the unpredictability. That's the unpredictability of the market, which you always have to realize. Neither any fund manager nor any investor can predict to the precision that these things will happen. We saw a correction of 1300 points for no rhyme or reason just 5 days back, and after that markets have bounced back handsomely. Everybody thought that now it will fall by another 5%. It ain't gonna happen. Even if it happens, it is temporary, it is transient, and it is gonna recover. Another classic example, I just wanted to build this analogy by giving various examples of life of markets as well. US equities infested by severe crashes since 1990s. For last nearly 31 years, you had constant crashes. Whenever the market surged, there was a crash. So we saw a 90 crash when Iraq invaded, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and Kuwait, along with the United States of America, retaliated back. 91, Japanese asset bubble burst. 92, Black Wednesday, when the GBP withdrawal by the European exchange rate mechanism. 97, Asian crisis. 98, Russian currency default. 2000, dot-com bubble. 2001, 9/11. And the list goes on. 2002, stock market crash. 2008, great financial crisis. We all remember that. Last 11 years, there have been blips. There have been downturns, very insignificant in the US markets, and the trajectory has been rather northward. It hasn't happened for quite some time in the United States history, at least in the history of United States equities. But it happened. It surely is happening today. What will you call it? So remember, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make, that our mind always believes that whatever has happened will continue to happen forever. It isn't the case. Things keep changing, things keep transforming. And that's the journey which Indian equities, Indian economy, and Indian markets are gonna witness from today till about the next decade or so. Another very interesting point, we have not seen for 70, 80 years in Poland. Poland is, by the way, the largest, and Poland is the fastest, not the largest, my bad, is the fastest growing economy in Eurozone. An erstwhile communist regime, which was in tatters, which was in abject poverty till about 89. And when they liberalized, they opened their markets, and since then, it is the fastest growing economy in Eurozone, one of the most prosperous economies in Eurozone, one of the most investor-friendly economies in Europe. So if you want to access entire Europe, UK, the Western world, without taking America into consideration, the best place to do business is Poland today. Similarly, India. Look at India. For last out of 75 years, till about 90, from 47 till about 90, nearly about 45, 46 years, 44, 45 years, we never had a growth rate. Which was beyond so-called Hindu rate of growth. They used to call it Hindu rate of growth because the growth was modest. It was sub 4%. 91, again, not by choice, but by compulsion. Not by choice, but by compulsion, Indian economy opened up. We liberalized the economy. We did massive reforms in the currency. We deregulated our banking system. We freed our capital from the banking system. The statutory liquidity ratio, which means the GSEC percentage, which used to be 45%, came down to 20%, and today it stands at 12-13%. So there was a lot of capital which got freed up, and you could see the result of it, that today, not only today, but even for some time in the past, Indian economy has actually grown at 14-15% nominally. 14-15% nominally, gentlemen. Here, it's a remarkable feat. Not many economies in this world, barring China, have actually witnessed this kind of growth, this kind of jump in their economies. And the most interesting part about the Indian economy is the journey, which I actually said to you guys is the inflection point where we are standing today. But what am I talking about? Let me give you some context. Let me give you some perspective. So history has shown that the fastest growth in the stock markets actually happen when so the growth in the equities, or growth in the barometer of the economy. What is the barometer of the economy? The capital markets, the equity markets of any country. The highest growth in the barometer of the economy happens when the economy's size grows from $2.5 trillion to $5 trillion, to $2.5 trillion to $5 trillion. Till now, only three economies have actually crossed a $5 trillion mark till now. The Japanese economy, the economy of United States of America, and the economy of the Republic of China. Just these three. And we are going to talk about only two of the economies, which is China and US. The reason being, we are not looking at reaching the $5 trillion mark, but we are looking at how India can actually achieve a $10 trillion mark. And let me substantiate with some numbers here. So let's first talk about the journey from $2.5 trillion to $5 trillion. United States took nearly 9 years from 1979 till about 1988 to move from $2.5 trillion to a $5 trillion. And it compounded at a rate of 7%. The interesting part is that during this time frame, the S&P 500 compounded at 17%, 17. 9-year period, 17% compounding. China did it rather quickly. Today's the size of Chinese economy is $14 trillion. The US economy is closer to $22 trillion. So China moved from $2.5 trillion to a $5 trillion in a matter of 5 years. And the stock markets during that 5-year window compounded at a whooping rate of 28%. 28%. And gentlemen, if you understand with this, 28% compounding essentially means roughly you double your money every 3 years. That's the speed with which the Chinese barometer or the Shanghai stock index moved with. India today is at a $2.9 trillion. And in next 3 years, latest by 2025, March 2025, or by March 2025, we should be somewhere around a $5 trillion mark. And you can imagine from 2.9, we should be a $5 trillion mark. And you can imagine what can happen to the stock markets there. But as I mentioned, we are not talking about a $5 trillion mark. We are talking about a $10 trillion mark, because that's our personal belief that India by 31st of March 2032 will be closer to a $10 trillion mark. And why do I say so? What is the growth do we need? From $2.9 trillion, we need a compounding of nearly 15 odd percent. Is it tough? I don't think so. We have done it. We have done it 3 consecutive times. We have done it from 2003 till about 2013. 10 consecutive years we have grown nominally. Nominally means real GDP growth plus inflation. So we have grown at 15% compounding. 2004 till 2014, 2005 till 2015. So even if we grow at 14 or 15% nominally, and it's very simple, 8-9% of real GDP growth and 6 to 7% of inflation. So we are already looking at staring at an inflation of around 6%. So it's very, very achievable number for India to compound at 15 to 16% over next 10 years. And if that were to happen, the Indian economy is going to shift from $2.9 trillion to become the 3rd largest economy in the world over a period of 10 years to $10 trillion, which means even if I extrapolate just the index, which is currently, let's assume Sensex of 65,000, it will touch a mark of closer to 2.25 lakhs in a time frame of 10 years. But obviously the trajectory is going to be northward, but the movement will be up and down very, very distinctly. That's what is going to happen. Why am I saying so? These are the future possibilities. But why am I so sure that this can happen and this will happen? There are 4 simple arguments. The first, for the first time, gentlemen, for the first time in the history of India, 75 years, the gross capital formation. So I'm sure some of you understand the fact that expenses can only be of 2 types. One is revenue expenditure or operating expenditure, which are recurring in basis, which do not enable any further income. Then there is something known as capex or capital formation or capital expenditure, which enables, when you incur this kind of expenditure, your income generation propensity, your income generation capability, your income generation capacity increases. In the history, it has never happened that all three, whether it is retail, so there are only 3 segments in any economy: household, government, and corporate. These are the 3 who do any kind of capex. These are the ones who do savings. These are the ones who do investments. First, government. Government is talking about 100 lakh crore of infrastructure spend over next 5 years. And just to give you a perspective in terms of the numbers, current size of Indian economy, I said, is $2.9 trillion. If you translate into the Indian system of number counting, it translates into 22 lakh crores. So nearly over 4x of government infra spend is going to come in next 5 years. It's already started. The infra spend on a Y-on-Y basis from the government side has jumped by nearly 70%, 70. Second, corporates. The corporates are in an extremely sweet position, extremely sweet. Why am I saying so? 3 reasons. First, the government has introduced something known as the PLI, Performance Linked Incentive Scheme for manufacturing, under which the government is going to shell out nearly 3.5 lakh crore of quantum of money, which means companies which will scale up their production, obviously they're going to sell more. As they sell more, their economies of scale will kick in, which means that their profits will go up because revenues will go high at a higher speed as compared to the expenditure. And if that were to happen, clearly the profits will go up. So that's number one. Number two, the tax regime in India is one of the most corporate taxation at this point in time. We are amongst all large capital markets in the world, we are the third lowest in terms of the taxation. For a old company, the corporate taxation is 25%. And if you have incorporated a company, an LLP, after 1st of October 2019, gentlemen, then the taxation is as low as 15%. Number three, the government focus on this, on the corporate side, has enabled corporates to talk about, to do infrastructure or fresh capex, fresh capital expenditure, and the expenditure which has been announced in last 9 months by the corporates, by various corporates, predominantly by BSE 100 companies, is closer to 5 lakh crores. So that's the kind of momentum we are seeing from the corporates. Let's come to individuals. We are seeing heightened investments in real estate beyond equities from the households. And you can see from the chart that the household inventory is nearly a 15-year low, which clearly means that the wealth effect is kicking in. What do you mean by wealth effect? Wealth effect simply means when your wealth grows significantly, then you try and move assets from the financial investments into the fixed assets, and that's what is happening. And whenever you'll buy a commercial real estate, you have a higher propensity to earn. And that's when we are seeing that all the three segments are firing in the gross capital formation like never before. The second argument why I believe that the Indian economy can hit a $10 trillion mark, the agriculture. Most people till now believed that agriculture is a laggard. Agriculture is a pain. Agriculture is something which is pulling the economy down. Let me give you some very interesting data points. 2020, 2021 have been very, very tough years for the world over. During those toughest years, agriculture came and agriculture supported us wholeheartedly. You would be surprised that the farm income in 20 and 21 grew at a compounding of 9%. When all the wages, all the profits, everything got dipped, farm income actually increased. Second, in last 3 or 4 years, the government has spent nearly 30,000 odd crores in building something what is known as Pradhan Mantri Gramin Sadak Yojana, Prime Minister's Rural Road Initiative. And what it has done, it has brought three key benefits to the rural economy. The first one, people who were jobless, people who were landless, people who were jobless and people who were landless, both of them now could work at the road construction sites and still can earn better wages. Number one, that adds to the rural economy. Number two, earlier farmers and peasants. Mr. Krishnaswamy, would you just mind just muting yourself? Sorry.
Sure.
There's some disturbance in the background. Thank you. So peasants and farmers who are totally dependent on the middleman or only at the APMCs, and I'm sure you know what are APMCs. They were only dependent on the APMCs and on the middleman to sell their output. Today, can, using those roads, can come from the rural areas to the nearing urban areas, sell their output and go back. They do not have to come and settle in urban areas for their livelihood, which means that their earnings and their middleman removal has made their business, their agriculture produce hugely profitable. Number three, the government's focus on the cash crops. So earlier the focus was only on wheat and rice, because remember, for first 40 years since independence, we were trying to be self-reliant in terms of our basic food items. Now we are shifting towards nutrition, and hence protein becomes very, very important. And that is the reason peanuts, chana, soya bean, all of them are being sowed by the farmers to make sure that they have a better outcome in terms of their income. Earlier, the farmers only used to have 2 crops during the year. Now they are able to do 5 crops because of the technology, because of the connectivity of these roads. They are able to learn, they are able to get the material, they are able to get the fertilizers, they are able to get all the seeds much faster, much quickly, and the turnaround is even more swifter. The third important leg of this $10 trillion economy is you and me, the people of India. We, the people of India. India is a large country with a population of 138 crores, 1.38 billion. 1.38 billion. And the interesting part is we are the youngest country in the world. And for finite future, at least next 10-15 years, we will remain the youngest country in the near future. So think about it and look at the demographics, such favorable demographics. If I have to divide the population basis age, people who are less than 15 years of age, they cannot technically work. Law doesn't permit them. Some people do work because of their poverty, but the law does not permit. Generally, people retire at the age of 59, 60. So if I look at people who are between 15 to 60, the population is nearly 64-65%, which means for every one dependent, there are 2 earning people, at least of that age. Urbanization is happening at a very rapid pace. We are currently urbanized to the extent of 30-35%, 34-33%. And this number is expected in next 8 to 10 years to be 42%. So nearly half the India's population over next 10 to 15 years will be urbanized, which means there will be higher demand, there will be higher literacy, there will be higher usage of the goods and services. And hence, we would see the demand remaining in perpetuity. Because of this entire economic growth, currently what we are seeing is only 25%, 1 out of the 4 households in India. So India has nearly around 30. So the household is generally comprises of 5 people in every household. That's the general thumb rule. Generally, people in the urban areas, the household comprises of 2, 3 or 4 people, but the average household comprises of 5 people. And if I look at in India, we have, as I mentioned, we have a 138 crore population. So we have rough and ready nearly around 30 odd crores or 28 odd crore households. Currently, only 1 out of the 4 households are in middle class or upper middle class, very, very limited in upper middle class. But because of this change, because of this growth in income, growth in the demographics, because of the agricultural reforms, agricultural boost, what we are going to see, that whole bunch of guys who are into the lower middle class or into the poverty are going to move upward. So the expectation is that by 2030, 1 out of 2 households will be middle class or upper middle class. So you can imagine nearly 25 to 30% of the increased population will be in the middle class, will be consuming more, will be asking more, will be demanding more. This is a very interesting chart. You have to understand with little bit of careful approach here. So there is something known as lag impact. We all understand, as I mentioned in my conversation earlier, that Poland got liberalized in 1989 and India got liberalized in 1991. And since 91, the reform process in India has been ongoing, has been constantly been going. However, the biggest reforms have happened in the history of India from 91 to 2000. And I mentioned about that how the currency got devalued, how the currency got freely priced by the market forces. We saw formation of SEBI, we saw freeing of the capital. And during this period, the growth of the stock market from 91 till about 2000, the growth of the stock market was relatively modest. Especially for the mid and small cap, it was even more modest. So it was only 450 odd percent. But what happens the decade when the reforms take place, there's something known as the lag effect. Lag effect basically means when the reforms take place, there is first to implement those reforms, it takes time. Then to measure those reforms, it takes time. To execute those reforms, it takes time. To take corrective measures if something has gone wrong, it takes time. And hence, the true benefit of any reforms, only comes in the next decade in which the reforms have happened. So if the reforms have happened between 91 to 2000, the biggest growth in the equity markets actually came in the decade from 2000 to 2010. And let me give you a very interesting data point. Since the data is only available from 2003 onwards for the mid and the small cap, during an 8-year window, the compounding in the mid cap happened by 22.5%, or the mid cap actually grew by 764% in an 8-year period. The small cap index actually grew by nearly 10x in 8 years, 10 times in 8 years. That's the kind of growth which we saw. Since the growth was robust from 2000 to 2010, limited reforms were done beyond one very important reform, which is known as RTI, Right to Information. Subsequently, fast forward, 2010 to 2020, again, massive reforms. We all know demonetization, DBT, free liberalization of the gas subsidies, etc. Multiple reforms, a slew of reforms, privatization in the retail, freeing up insurance FDIs, multiple reforms. And during that period, again, the small cap only moved up by 247%. The decade when the benefit of these reforms from 10 to 20 will actually accrue from 20 to 2030. And that's what we are already seeing, the growth in the stock markets. The biggest beneficiary of the reforms, the biggest beneficiary of these reforms are the mid and small caps. And you can see during a 10-year period, very limited companies actually become a micro cap. So SEBI has defined it very, very simply. Top 100 are the large caps, 100 to 250 are the mid caps, 250 to 500 are the small caps, and 500 to 1000 are the micro caps, and so on and so forth. We did a very interesting study and we saw that businesses which are micro caps, very limited number of businesses actually become mid caps. And even some of them which become mid caps, they compound at a rate of 22%. And whilst some of them, which the micro caps which become the large cap, which become even the mid cap, micro caps becoming the mid cap, they compound at a rate of 37%. The chances are limited, but if you identify the right businesses, hence the key is to, if you want to maximize in a fast growing economy, you have to make sure that you identify the right businesses. And that's what we try and do at Ambit Asset Management. We run 3 portfolios: large cap, mid cap, small cap. And our thought process is very simple. We don't want to increase the risk. We don't want to increase the unpredictability. We don't want to increase the volatility in equities, because equities itself is risky. When equities are risky, why would you want to add further risk in equities? So the thing which one needs to do is to de-risk equities, and that's what we try and do. We buy businesses which are not linked to politicians. We buy businesses which do not have crony capitalism. We buy businesses which are unlevered, which are not leveraged. We buy businesses which are monopolies. We buy businesses which have strong moats, and that's what we have seen across all our funds, whether it is the large cap fund, which is Coffee Can, or the mid cap fund, which is the Good and Clean Mid Cap Fund, or the small cap fund. It has outperformed the market constantly, consistently. And that's why you can see the compounding in the large cap since 2017, when we launched this fund, has been 23%. The mid caps last 3-4 years have been relatively sluggish. We have compounded at 16%, when the mid cap index has compounded at 13%, while the small caps, we have compounded nearly at 20%. So my request is, forget about investing with Ambit or not investing with Ambit. That's not the important point here. The important point is you have to start understanding and look beyond today now, because what is today and now, what is not gonna be there tomorrow. We are at a trajectory which is absolutely phenomenal. And if you are patient, the amount of money which you can make from Indian markets will be unparalleled, So as I say, I can't change one state, but I can educate. And that's the reason why am I here. So thank you, gentlemen, for your patient listening. Now, Balaji, if you want, I can take the questions on the interest rates, inflation, FIS sellout, which you have mentioned, or do you want to ask anything? I'm happy to answer. And from the audience, if anyone wants to ask any questions, let's have a direct dialogue. Please, Balaji.
First up, thank you, Mr. Siddhartha. It was very insightful. And second point is, with so many points, which probably people with any myopic view in terms of markets miss out. The larger points that you have discussed are definitely eye-openers in terms of the potential, especially the $1 trillion economy that India's potential, and vis-a-vis the relations to the market's performance in comparison to countries like US and China. That itself is a big eye-opener for people who are looking at the current trends. But being present in the current current climate of what's happening around us, as clients also tend to ignore the bigger picture, and they look at the immediate headwinds and what's going to happen. And if you were to look at typically with my interactions, I would say the immediate question that comes in through is what's happening with the Delta variant and its impact on European countries, and vis-a-vis what would happen if at all, if you were to look at a situation, if it comes to in India, and whether we have a similar scenario as in 2020 March. So such a scenario happening is a very, very regular question. While I've been addressing it, I think you would be able to give a very clear picture on that.
Sure. So very, very interesting question. So Balaji, let me use a phrase which I commonly use. Markets never correct on the same news twice. Markets never correct on the same news twice. What does this mean? So we saw Indian markets over a span of 3 days corrected by nearly 30% in the month of March 2020. We saw very limited casualties. God was very, very kind that in our first COVID wave, the casualties were very, very limited, right?
Yes.
After that, the market started recovering by August. By August of 2020, the markets had fully recovered. By August, September of 2020, the markets had, at least the Nifty indices, I would not use the word markets, the indices had fully recovered. We saw a worst, we have seen a worst wave we saw a worst wave during March, April, May, and June of 2021. Nearly 3x the casualties of as compared to the first wave. What happened? Markets didn't correct. Markets didn't go down. Because remember, whatever is known to the markets, markets never correct because of the known factors. And hence, delta is known to the world. It is also known to the world that if Europe goes into recession because of the delta, it's a huge positive for India. It's a huge positive for India because India is exiting the pandemic. We already have a herd immunity. With the vaccination and with the herd immunity, we are out of the pandemic. So we are going full throttle. India for next 3 years, I'm talking about 10 years, for next 3 years, gentlemen, you will see Indian economy growing in real terms between 8 to 10%. In nominal terms, in next 3 years, FY22, FY23, FY24, for next 3 years, Indian economy nominally is going to grow above 14 to 15%. It is the fastest growing economy for next 3 years. And if Europe concern comes in, very good. Because what will happen? How can, in a dying economy, you can increase the interest rates? Sorry, boss, you have to push it even further. In a dying economy, how can you stop quantitative easing? Sorry, boss, you can't do it. Push it further. Right? So till the time there is problem in the world, the money will keep coming to the emerging market. So that's number one. Number two, you had a question and I would just want to answer because this question keeps coming to me quite frequently, that quantitative easing or the easy money is now, QE is being withdrawn in a gradual manner from December. What is US saying? Here what Fed is saying, three things. First, Fed is saying that I'm not going to pump further. They are not saying what is pumped is going to be withdrawn. So the first leg is I'm slowing down the pumping of money. Correct. I'm slowing down the pumping of money. So I was earlier pumping $300 billion of cash into the system by buying toxic securities. It will gradually become 200. It will gradually become 100. It will gradually become 50, which means money flow will reduce. That's number one. Number two, it is still not saying I'm going to withdraw the money. So I'm not contracting the economy size. Okay. So that's number two. Number three, Fed is announcing hundreds of times constantly for last 3-6 months about this. So market has already discounted. Market always reacts on unprecedented news, not something which is known to the markets. This thing is known to the markets. If it is known to me, it is also known to the Panwala. If it is also known to the Panwala, then everybody already has made plans of it. Very, very distinctly, it is known. In such a situation, that's why markets will never correct because of the quantitative easing. So remember that fact. So because of even COVID resurgence, it is not going to come. Even if it comes, the government will only have very localized lockdowns. We already saw in Maharashtra. So in Maharashtra, where I stay in Mumbai, we saw that the lockdowns of the societies, that's about it. Cases which were there for more than 5 cases in the society, only the society was locked down. That's about it. No area, no territory, no movement, nothing was shut. And that's what is going to happen. It will be lower quarantines, lower area jurisdictions which will be locked down, not because government very clearly recognizes the fact that this is the moment for India to surge back. And that's why government is in no mood, and beyond me, government realizes that India has a large youth population. If it shuts down the economy again, the youth will have a challenge, and that's what they don't want.
Thank you. And I had one more query.
Yes.
That is the current trending one that is on the inflationary pressures and what what would be the impact, as in the monetary policy specific to India? When would you see this changing to from accommodative stance and with the kind of prevailing environment?
Right. So the first things first. So let's talk about India. You have to remember one thing. India is not a price maker. I'm using the word. Please understand this. India is not a price maker. It's a price taker. So think about it. If the US interest rates are at 5%, can we keep the interest rates low in India? The answer is no. Because our fiscal deficit, our state deficit, our municipal corporation deficit, all put together runs in double digits. So if that were to happen, we need external capital for the debt markets. And if we need external capital for the debt markets at this point in time, we can't decide the interest rates on our own all by ourselves. It will completely be dependent on the Western world. So
Okay.
we can't, if we increase the interest rates, our growth will suffer. We'll receive capital on the debt markets, but our growth will suffer immensely. And if the growth suffers, see, remember, whether it is India, whether it is US, whether it is any economy, who are the biggest borrowers in the world? So by the way, debt markets are nearly 1.5x of the equity markets worldwide. So equity markets are nearly about $84 trillion. The debt markets are 119, $120 trillion broadly. That's the kind of numbers, give or take. That was the data maybe 6 months back. It would have changed a little bit. So think about it. Who are the biggest borrowers of this $120 trillion, $125 trillion? The governments, Western governments, including India. India has been borrowing significant amount of money because they need money for vaccination, they need money for the infrastructure spend. I spoke about the infrastructure pipeline, etc. Right now, if all the governments need money, and if COVID is resurging, you are saying in the West, how can they increase the interest rates? Because politicians can be anything, but they are not foolish. If they are not foolish, why would they want to increase the interest rates when they will be the first sufferers? So that's number one. Number two, if the the maths of interest rates is very simple. The modern economic theory says that you bring the interest rates down to zero when the growth or when there is a catastrophe in the economy. You keep borrowing more money at zero or sub-zero interest rates. When these interest rates are negligible, you borrow tons of money, you pump it into the economy. As the economy grows, the tax collection increases, and as the tax collection increases, you pay off the bonds. Now think about it. As soon as the interest rate rises significantly, what happens? The growth gets compromised. As the growth gets compromised, the tax collection reduces, which means that the government goes into a debt trap, because government now has to, earlier government was paying zero interest. Now they have to pay some interest for the fresh bond issuances. And the corporates which were able to make more money because they were paying lesser interest, now they have to pay more interest, and hence the tax collection will reduce. And as the interest rate rises, also the consumer demand also reduces. The borrowers come lesser to the market for using borrowed money for end demand. So it's a detrimental. So everybody is looking only from a single side perspective of inflation. People are not understanding that if growth gets compromised, the world will go into extremely deep recession. And all economists and all politicians understand that, if I understand that. So the earliest United States is going to increase the interest rates and policy rates not before 2023. And that too, it will be token interest rates, 0.10, 0.10, 0.15. It's token. 0 or 0.15 makes any difference? The answer is no. Similarly, even if RBI has to increase the interest rates, it's not going to be 5%, 4% jump. It will be a CR, it will be best a repo and a reverse repo rate jump of 25 basis. That's about it.
Correct.
It will be a token. So that's number two. Number three, remember that inflation is transient. The reason why inflation has gone up is because of the perishables. Because of the supply chain disruptions, most of the perishables are not able to reach freely, and till the time this supply chain gets ionized, gets ironed out, the inflationary pressures will be there, and it is transient. So that's number one on the inflationary supply side constraint. Number two challenge is energy costs have risen up because all of a sudden there is humongous demand because people are just consuming like crazy. It is also going to be transient. Everybody understands that for next 3 quarters, energy prices are going to be higher, commodity prices are going to be higher. And that's why this demand is also going to get ironed out. It will get averaged out. So this inflation, which we are seeing at a super normal level, it's also going to come down. And remember, inflation is always compared to the base. So think about it. For last September, October, it was some of the worst periods for the European countries. It was some of the worst periods for the US. The vaccine was not out. Demand was lower, and hence, at that point in time, it's year-on-year inflation. And hence, because of the base impact, you're also seeing a higher inflation, which is going to get evened out in a matter of next 2 to 3 quarters. So RBI realizes it, Fed realizes it, and hence they will not do anything stupid to curtail the growth. Curtail the growth of the underlying economy. Because remember, if you curtail the growth of the underlying economy, the lowest trade of the society gets hurt most. The smallest SME and MSMEs get hurt most because their interest rates with a 0.1 or 0.2% also, they are highly elastic, which means 0.1, 0.2% will push their interest rates significantly up. So they are not going to disturb and kill the lowest segment of the society or economy.
Understood. I have one more question. It's a rather a hypothetical question. If we were to look at a client whose asset allocation is currently probably a large cap oriented around 65, and you have around 35% remaining in mid cap, mid and small being only around 5 to 10. If that were to be the case, and seeing the trend in the recent the bull run, and having seen the small cap index outperforming the other two indices, if you were to look at a client taking a decision on your emerging giants or a coffee can or so is it going to be based on what is there in his asset allocation, or is it also in terms of the potential in the upcoming next 3 to 5 years? And what would be the decision making? Because the client may not be investing in multiple funds, and if you have to make a choice, what would be the rationale for that investor?
So the first thing the investor should look for is the patience. So the time horizon. So if your time horizon is anything from 60 months plus to 72 months, then the emerging giants is the best bet. That will be the one of the biggest multi-baggers which you'll see from our perspective. Because what we are seeing is, as I mentioned in my slides as well, there'll be few businesses which will be from the micro cap or from the small cap basket will move into the mid cap basket, and maybe a very limited will move into the large cap basket. And remember that we do the same amount of due diligence and even more when it is a small cap fund. And hence, our sense is that with the economy resurging, a small cap is the best bet if you have 72 months plus time horizon. If you have a 36 months, then you should stick with the coffee can, because coffee can is also going to give very handsome returns. And especially in next 3 years, the reason I'm saying is, as I mentioned, this demand consolidation is happening. So whether you like it or not, there are some smaller businesses which will die, which have died because of the COVID situation, because they are not able to manage their finances. Because another interesting thing which is happening is, which is not really interesting, but it is something sad. It is happening. It happens once or twice in a century, and it is happening today. The commodity prices are changing by the minute. The raw material prices is changing by the minute. So today I placed the order for buying 1 ton of cotton. it will cost me X. Half an hour later, it will cost me Y. And there's a delta between it. For a large corporate, it's fine, they will survive. How will a small corporate plan their finances, plan their sales? They cannot even pass on this price hike seamlessly to their customers. Their customers will run away because they are smaller businesses. And hence, a lot of small businesses will get folded up. They will exit the businesses to the larger guys, and larger guys will become even bigger, even larger. And hence, if you have a relatively shorter term, Coffee Can is also going to do immensely well.
That was that was quite clear in terms of if it is a 72-month sort of a window that the client has, then the emerging giants, just for the understanding of the guests, that's the small cap fund that he's talking about. I have kind of finished my questions. Sir, I think Sushil sir, Ramanathan sir, I think you might have any questions. Please do come forward and ask these questions.
Balaji, nothing specific. I think you had a good coverage, and you asked a few of them, so that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Sir Ramanathan sir, do you have any questions, sir? Normally, you do have a couple of queries on the markets per se.
I think all my questions have been answered.
Thank you, sir.
I've understood the whole game now. Discussing with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think Anirudh is having a question. I just read it out. Any thoughts on if there is any impact because of the ongoing chip shortage?
100% yes. 100% yes. So ongoing chip shortage, it is not a temporary phenomenon. So keep in mind, ladies, keep in mind, gentlemen. First is India is not one of the biggest manufacturers. We are still at a very nascent stage. So I'm sure you guys are aware that the biggest chip manufacturers across the world is Taiwan. That's the economy which manufactures, produces the largest number of chips. You also know that at this point in time, we have a shortage because now every household, at least the urban household in India, have six to eight machines. When I say machines, it is including a laptop and a smartphone. So something I have got 2 or 3 for myself, right? I have an office laptop, I have a personal laptop, I have a smartphone, similarly for my wife, similarly for my kids. And somebody who has, adult children, I have young children. So you have 16, 17 machines, equipment, which is being consumed by an average household. And it is only going to multiply because every 2 years, every 1.5 years, you upgrade your at least your smartphone, and every 3 years, you upgrade your machine. So that's number one. So it is a perpetual thing. Number two is the arrival of 5G. So 5G equipment will require nearly 3 to 4x of the chips of the ICs which are being currently used in the other equipments. So this equipment will constantly be utilized as the 5G technology, which is just knocking our doors, right? It is a matter of 6 months, 12 months, when the 5G phones, 5G enabled laptops, tablets, everything will be available in the market. And there'll be a bunch of people who will be going for it. So that is something which is going to be there. However, how can you invest into something of this sort? Limited choice. So barring Dixon Technologies, which is a huge beneficiary of the PLI, there aren't any credible players listed on the stock exchange which can actually benefit from this equipment shortage, etc. I don't know if you have any private companies which manufacture chips. If you have, please go and do a private investment directly into that company rather than doing it into a fund route. If you have some opportunities, please go ahead, because this is not a short-term phenomenon. This is a perpetual phenomenon.
Okay. Understood. Any further questions from any other guests? I guess I think most of the questions are already answered through the flow of the presentation, rather. And I guess I think we don't have any more questions. And I would like to give you the thank you note, as in it was an excellent presentation, and there was so much of precise explanation of points for people who are part of the presentation. And I hope to take forward these points to the clients who had probably not missed out on the presentation. And thank you so much for an excellent presentation from your end, and giving a detailed view on the larger picture of the markets. I hope our guests have got a good insights on the way forward for the markets with the immediate challenges, and rather the larger picture, and where to look at their current investments are. So thank you so much, Mr. Siddhartha, and thank you so much for all my guests for being part of this presentation, for having taken time, and would like to see a similar sort of session if in future, if it's possible, and I would definitely let you know after taking his time. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your patience, and let's ensure that we trust our economy more than FIIs, because remember, FIIs are opportunistic. They are gonna keep coming and making tons of money. They have even invested in a US dividend fund investing into a loss-making company like Zomato. It's unheard of. So the challenge is we ourselves don't trust our economy. So start trusting your economy, and you would see you'll immensely benefit by your trust. So with this word, thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.